Do you often forget why you walked into the room? Do you bring your phone to the charger and then forget to actually plug it in? Have you ever written down your appointment on the 8th at 10, on the 10th at 8? What do these all have in common? They're all part of your executive function, specifically working memory. Get ready to learn about your brain. Welcome to Motherhood and ADHD. I'm your friend, Patricia Sung. My mission is to be a lighthouse for mothers with ADHD, helping you find your path to success by learning to appreciate your ADHD as an asset. I'm seeking to change the paradigm that ADHD means your life is doomed to be a hot mess. So I'm sharing strategies and encouraging you in your pursuit of happiness to love who you are every day of your ADHD life. Hey Successful Mama, it's your friend Patricia Sung. We are talking about executive function, the CEO of your brain. I can't explain ADHD without discussing executive function. If you're not familiar with the concept of executive function, you can listen to the first episode in the series, number 53, for an executive function overview. We're going to be covering a variety of executive functions in this series, and today we're talking about working memory. The dictionary definition of working memory is the part of short-term memory which is concerned with immediate, conscious, perceptual, and linguistic processing. Let's break that down. So it's part of your short-term memory, and it is the immediate conscious, so immediate right away, conscious, what you're aware of. Perceptual is relating to the ability to interpret or become aware of something through the senses. So that kind of processing. And then also your linguistic processing, and linguistic means relating to language. Working memory is the retention of a small amount of information in readily accessible form. It facilitates planning, comprehension, reasoning, and problem solving. Now you can see here where the link is to the other areas of executive functioning, which things like planning. That's the thing about executive function. It's all kind of this Venn diagram of all these different circles, and they all overlap and they all connect to each other. It's not a cut and dry description. Everything links to other parts of the executive function, and they all work together in order to make our brains run efficiently. Now, if you want to geek out, you can read the full articles that I am using for my research on my website. You can go to the show notes and read all about that. And plus, you can make sure that I'm not just making stuff up. You know that I'm getting it from reliable sources. So if you do want to look at that information, the website is patriciasung.com/show-notes. Now, working memory is often used synonymously with short-term memory, but they are two different things because your working memory is not storing things away like short-term memory is. So pulling that all together, how can we make that a more bite-sized chunk? We're looking at how much information can you hold in your brain for a short amount of time. We're talking like 10-15 seconds, and then use that information to make a decision or complete an action, because we're talking about immediate conscious, perceptual, and linguistic processing, immediate processing. What are you going to do with that information once it's in your brain? So for me, this shows up as a general idea of incompleteness. ADHD brains start and they don't finish. If you're an analogy person, to me, it's like you throw the clothes in the wash and the washing machine twirls it around, gets them all soapy, cleans it, and then it's kind of like the process stalls before the rinse happens or before the spin happens. And so it gets partway through and then the process gets interrupted and you don't see that fruition. So where does this show up as an adult with ADHD? Remembering a response to a question you literally just asked. I have this problem when I ask my kids, like, oh, what do you want for breakfast? Do you want yogurt or cereal? And they'll tell me. And then I turn around to the fridge and I literally have no idea what they just said. And I have to ask it again. Writing appointments down in your calendar correctly, flip-flopping dates and times and making sure that that gets in correctly so that you can actually show up for the appointment. Repeating back a phone number. I wish everyone had that phone number that is in the song in, I think it's like the 80s, that like 8675309. Like if I could sing a song for everybody's phone number, then I would remember them all. There are times where I don't finish my sentence and I don't even realize that I did it. And my husband he drives him crazy that I'll start the sentence and just kind of trail off, and my brain's still processing. My brain's still thinking, and nothing comes out. And he's like, what is wrong with you? Why aren't you talking? He's more used to it now, and he'll be like, hey, you didn't finish that sentence. But it happens a lot. Sometimes I have trouble finding the right words for things. Like I can picture it. I can see the thing that I want to say, but I just can't find the word. Like the processing just kind of like I call it the beach ball of death on the Mac. Well, you don't have a Mac now, but I used to. You just get that spinny ball, or even on a PC, you get the spinny circle and nothing's happening. Like I'm looking for the word and I know the word, but yet I can't pull it out of my brain. Remembering where I set stuff down, like where's my phone? Where are my glasses? Where are my keys? I just had them in my hand and I don't remember at what point I set them down, but obviously they have to be here in the house because I unlocked the door when I walked in. So where did the keys go? Walking into a room and not remembering why I just walked to the kitchen. Clearly I was there for a reason. What was it? You always know that I was in the kitchen because there's this wake of open cabinet doors that I get stuff out and then forget to shut the door. That completeness of ending the action to like full fruition just doesn't happen. Now, how do other people interpret this? They feel like I'm not paying attention, that I'm not listening to what they're saying. Obviously, if I ask you what you want for breakfast and then I can't remember the answer, it makes it feel like you're not important enough for me to listen to the answer. And that's not it. It just, my brain has like a hiccup and it did not absorb the information that was right there in front of me. So they feel like I don't care. Maybe you've heard that you're spacey or you're forgetful or lazy or dumb because you don't pick up on these pieces of information that are being thrown at you or not finishing the process. And it's a struggle because I was able to think of positives for the way that our brain functions in most of these executive dysfunction areas. There's some kind of like shining light or optimistic way that it can be used to your advantage. But I'm going to be honest, I could not think of a positive on working memory. So if you know of one, please send me one because I was like, is there any possible positive to this? And I couldn't think of one. This one to me is just such a struggle. It's definitely one of my biggest deficits. And when I think back to my original ADHD screening, which I was probably about 18 or 19 at the time, I had a very complex screening because I was part of a graduate student's work. And she did this huge battery of tests on me. And one of them was this number recall where she would list out a number. She would just say a whole bunch of numbers in random order. And then I had to repeat them back to her. And I felt pretty confident about most of the tests, but that one I could remember a few numbers and then you had to recite them backwards. So, she would say maybe 20 numbers in a row. And then from frontwards, I remember I could get through probably 5 or 6 numbers. But then when she would say do it backwards, oh my goodness, it was I would remember 2 or 3 and that was it. And I remember when we got the results, my testing was at a 3rd grade level. Here I am, a sophomore in college, and my test in this area was 3rd grade, y'all. It was heartbreaking. And this is one of the reasons that I ended up not going to med school. I really wanted to be a surgeon for a while there. I mean, granted, in ADHD fashion, I've wanted to do a lot of things, but I really wanted to do surgery. And I realized, how am I going to memorize all of this anatomy? It just felt too overwhelming. So that's one of the reasons I eliminated that career choice. And I know there are ways to work around that. We'll talk about that in a second, but that struggle is real. Trying to keep things in front of mind is hard because my brain just doesn't have that connection piece there. Now, I have several systems to hold info so that my brain doesn't have to hold on to it, but I have to stay on top of those systems and be consistent about it or my system falls apart. So this is an area that I have had to work so hard on to get by in basic functioning. And I think I do a pretty good job of fooling most people. But I think that is one of the struggles why women especially are not diagnosed, because we figure out the system that works for us to be able to compensate in that area. And to the outside person, it doesn't look like we have that struggle there. But I work damn hard to keep up with that. It's not easy. It's not like I figured out the solution and now I don't have to work on it anymore. Like this is a daily, hourly, minute by minute struggle for me. So if you feel that same way, now you know you're not alone. And I guess some like the hacks that I do to try to compensate for this area of struggle. My first tip is always awareness. Awareness is important to me for two reasons. One, if I'm aware of something, I'm more likely to be able to make a difference on it than just powering through unaware. So that when I ask questions, if I have this awareness in the back of my mind, slowly but surely, my brain will continue to be aware of that struggle and I can start to adjust. I don't know, this sounds kind of kooky sometimes, but it's not going to make any difference at first. You won't notice it at all. But over time, if you're specifically working on something, your brain starts to like put all those puzzle pieces together and it does start to make a difference over time. Like I'm not saying like, oh, you work on your working memory for 2 days and by the third day you'll see a difference. No, I'm talking like weeks, months here. And that sounds like a long time and I'm sorry. But if I say, I know that I'm struggling to keep track of appointments, so I really want to be aware of that and I want to make sure that I'm putting it on my calendar. That's my plan. I'm going to write them down right away. When you encounter that I'm making the appointment, having that awareness, somewhere in the back of your brain, it'll start to pop up of like, oh yeah, you need to write that down. Now, whether you ignore that little voice in the back of your brain, that happens a lot. But if you tune into it, you'll start to be more and more aware and that will help you make the changes. And I know that sounds kind of kooky, but having an awareness about an area will lead you to more success over time. And then two, having that awareness of where you're struggling repetitively allows you to say, hey, if this is really hard for me, do I want to do something about it? Okay, I do. What are some options I can look for? Because I see the pattern in this. Here's where I can start to formulate a plan. So that awareness is just the first step in heading down the right path. So for example, I struggle with dates, getting things on my calendar, writing them down correctly. And I am in the habit of like when I make a doctor's appointment, I write it down right then in my calendar. But what I recently encountered was that I had made 2 appointments at the same time and I made one for 9:30 and one for 9:45, but I wrote them both down as 9:45. So I ended up being 15 minutes late for my appointment, which is I was not happy about because it's a short appointment and I needed that time with my doctor. So I've realized that it's not enough for me to just say, oh yeah, I got it written down. Now when I go for my appointments, I ask them to print me out a list of all my appointments for like the next month and I double check them all. So just every once in a while, I ask for that list and I can check and make sure I have everything written down correctly. If you need to at the beginning, like get that list every time, double check, look at the paper or get the little confirmation business card they'll usually give you. Take it anyway, even though you just wrote it down, take it with you and look and make sure I wrote this down for the same time that they did. Because those little details are just not our brain's strong suit. So writing it down right away, that's one of my hacks. I repeat everything back to people. So for example, if I ask my kids, hey, do you want yogurt or cereal? And they say yogurt, I make myself say, okay, we're having yogurt. Yogurt's what we're eating. We're opening the fridge and we're getting out the yogurt. And repeating it back or like singing it back to myself, that helps me remember what I'm supposed to be doing. And my kids just think I'm being goofy, so that's fine. Obviously, if you're at work, maybe you don't want to be singing a song about yogurt in the fridge, but you can also like sing that in your head to remember what you need to be doing. But finding those little tricks, which you probably do a ton of these things already, and you just didn't realize that you had accumulated all of these skills over time. Mnemonic devices. I used to do this all the time in science classes, memorizing geography and creating a mnemonic device. So like figuring out a way that makes sense with, say, like the starting initials of all the things I need to remember and making a silly sentence out of that in different words. Because when you link anything with something strange or out of the ordinary, your brain just remembers it better. So the weirder and the more bizarre thing you can link it to, the better your brain is at absorbing it. I used to use that all the time when I was teaching, is we would tell outlandishly goofy stories to learn new vocabulary because the kids would remember these goofball stories that we would tell. And I would have kids come back years later and say, remember that story we told about the blah, blah, blah? And I'll be honest, I mean, I've taught that lesson how many times since that kid was in my class, 40 times? I don't remember what story that was. Sometimes they do though. I mean, sometimes I could pinpoint the really goofy ones. I know because they stand out. So using those memory tricks will help you store away important things that you need to remember. Now, in terms of getting, distracted on the way to doing something else, I have very limited notifications on my phone. I've turned off almost everything because if I'm in the middle of doing something and my phone chirps, I'm going to get off on that tangent. So I just take that interrupter out so that it lessens the load on my working memory. Also, when I go to pick up my phone because I need to look up something and I see all the notifications, I will very quickly get drawn into all the things that are on my phone, and I'll never go pull up the recipe for dinner that I'm supposed to be, pulling ingredients out of the fridge, and I just spent 15 minutes looking through emails and clearing out notifications, and I needed to be cooking dinner. So limiting distractions that I know are going to take me off track. Now, one thing that I have not tried, but I've heard helps people, is that there are games that you can basically play to train your brain and help your working memory skills. Now, I don't know if they necessarily work. To be quite honest, I have not even touched them because I know that if I start playing a fun game, I'm going to get sucked into that and hyperfocus kicks in and I don't need that extra distraction. But if you feel like that's something that might work for you, that's an option out there. So we've learned about working memory, how we see the executive dysfunction in our ADHD brains. And so I hope you'll take this week to think about where you see the patterns of working memory struggles in your life. And is this something that you want to start working on? Is this something you want to tackle? Is this something you want to figure out some more tricks and hacks and tips to bridge that gap? Because our goal isn't to change who we are. We can't remove the ADHD from our brains. But we can find ways to bridge the gap so that we can still show up for our appointment on time and we can remember the thing we need to remember and complete the task and create more smoothness in completing the process with various strategies to lower the chaos in our lives, create more peace, and all around create an enjoyable motherhood for our everyday lives. Because knowledge is power. And knowing that we are not the only ones who struggle in these ways makes such a huge difference in our mental strength and fortitude because we're not alone. We have our community here. So thank you, Successful Mama, for being part of my community and supporting me in this crazy journey of motherhood with ADHD. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so that it shows right up on your phone every week because that's one less thing we have to remember. Have an amazing week, Successful Mama, and we'll talk soon. Thank you for listening to Motherhood and ADHD. For more resources, head over to our website, www.motherhoodandadhd.com.